Everyone has that one piece of media, don't they? That one book or movie or game that they're really obsessed with and want to share with the world, but it's so obscure that you know for a fact you'll be met with blank stares from anyone you talk to about it, or it's just so niche that no one actually cares. So much so that you may happen to make a YouTube video about it? Anyway, Primal is a game I first played 8 years ago and it genuinely became one of my all-time favourites. I have 3 copies, it's actually a serious problem. It was released in 2003 and developed by Sony Computer Entertainment Studio Cambridge, a now very dissolved developer known for the medieval games and not a whole lot else. Sales figures are spotty, but it seemed to do well enough that they were concepting a sequel before they dropped it in favour of 24 the game, just in case you were wondering what timeline we were living in. But it's been forgotten to time and you have to wonder why that is. Well, you don't, but you clicked on the video for some reason, right? So sit back, relax, and let's talk about Primal. Primal starts like all good games should, in New York City, and the POV of the world's tallest man trudging through the city's cleanest nightclub. Very early 2000s aesthetic. Anyway, mid-set, the lead vocalist gets menaced by an inconspicuous 10-foot man with glowing red eyes. The normal kind of patron you'd expect in this kind of establishment. Obviously freaking out about it as his girlfriend surprised him backstage. Let's properly introduce Lewis and Jen, the latter being one of the main protagonists of the game. Lewis is the stereotypical wannabe rock star, while Jen has dreams a little bit above living off the street. But we obviously have to get this show on the road, so the giant creep smashes through the door, knocks the bouncer's head clean off, before transforming into a demon in a bloody shocking twist, then proceeding to maul Jen and take off with Lewis. We then cut to Jen in critical condition in the hospital 2 days later, with the doctors fearing she might not pull through. Luckily there's a little dude in the corner that pumps Jen full of magic or something, which makes her astral project. This gargoyle is Scree, and he's here to enlist Jen's help. She agrees after an understandable amount of panic, considering she just woke up over her own unconscious body. Scree opens the room door that leads to the Nexus, the centre of oblivion, and while it's passé nowadays, this effect is actually really cool for a game of its age. Scree explains that Mortalis isn't the only realm and does the classic "the universe is bigger than you think" trope, before offering Jen van braces for protection. Scree then gives a very impassioned explanation about Arella, the embodiment of order and his lady, and Abaddon, the embodiment of chaos. He also mentions that he believes Lewis was taken here, which kind of clears Jen's general and reasonable confusion about all of this. Further to the forces of order and chaos, the centre of the Nexus sits Kronos, who sits in a machine that maintains the balance between the two. Obviously though, the balance is out of whack and we need to stop Abaddon's evil scheme. Our job is to stabilise the realms of order, we balance the power of the realms of chaos, and make everything right again. Jen also questions why her tattoo is everywhere in the Nexus, and Scree just stonewalls her. This entire opening section has been great at laying out the kind of people these two are. Jen is a mix of a naive stranger in a strange land, but is also snarky and cheeky, unafraid to talk back if she wants to. Conversely, Scree is on a more surface level a very serious character that is single-mindedly focused on his mission and really doesn't want to deal with Jen taking it as a joke. But there's also undertones of a quite caring individual. Here are some good examples.
For all our sakes, I trust your own sense of responsibility matches your distinctive sense of humor.
Distinctive good or distinctive?
Distinctive inappropriate.
I presume you have noticed this.
Indeed, there is a remarkable similarity.
They are identical, you lunk.
That aside, we're into the first realm, Solum. Scree drops the law that every realm is locked into one time of day and one season, with Solum being in a perpetual winter night. He also gives a brief rundown of the culture and the customs of the Solum inhabitants, the Ferai, a fierce race of hunters. He also explains that the king is basically an absolute ruler, but must always sacrifice himself to pass the throne to his heir. However, the current king, Hearn, hasn't done that, and no one knows why. Guess we have our direction for now. It is now 20 minutes into the game that we finally get proper control of Jen and are introduced to one of the main mechanics of the game, character switching. Simply put, you can control Jen or Scree, using each of their unique abilities to progress through the game. Speaking of, you come to a cave of Malkai, but Jen has nothing to protect herself with, so Scree has to light the way to scare them off to clear the path. All in all, it's just walking to the end of the cave, grabbing the torch, and then speed waddling back to light the fire. Simple stuff, but very underwhelming. But it does briefly highlight what Scree brings to the table. He's immortal and enemies will never target him. He can carry items, and right after we learn he can climb stonework surfaces. Soon after they get cornered by Maokai, but are luckily saved by King Hearn himself, the big hunky goat man. He's openly hostile to the duo before Scree explains who they are in Demonic. Speaking of, I love how the subtitles are in the language and not in English, because Jen's not going to know what they're saying. Shame, however, this is the only realm they really do it in. Anyway, Hearn is incredulous about who Jen is and says he's looking for his missing son Jared, which is the biggest case of the Tiffany problem if there ever was one. Jen offers to help, gets given a knife, and Hearn heads back to the temple to pray for his son's return. Once again, Scree has to head off to open the way for Jen, and that's 80% of this realm, honestly. It's not terrible, but it does get a bit monotonous. However, this is where we, 30 minutes into the game, are introduced to combat, and it's best described as weird. L2 and R2 are your basic attack buttons, each having different attacks tied to them. However, here's where the weirdness comes in. The game uses the PS2's, and I assume the PS4's, pressure-sensitive shoulder buttons to differentiate between light and heavy attacks based on how hard you press. The issue is, the threshold between light and heavy is really awkward and feels really unintuitive. Additionally, if you press both buttons together, you'll do a special attack. It has a long wind-up, but in return does a whole lot of damage. Further to that though, L1 performs a spinning attack to help you get space if you're being crowded by enemies, and R1 is block. But if you block with precise timing, you can perform a parry for a lot of damage, which is also required for some enemies. There is also a taunt button I never knew existed that is geared towards use against shielded enemies so they stop blocking all the time. That would have been helpful to know earlier. As Jen is now, everything deals a lot of damage to her, but thankfully she regens health outside of combat, which is nice. Travelling a little further, we find some ferri that tell you that Jared was hunting around here on the night he disappeared, and there were sounds of a fight. Which is nice to know, but to progress we need to knock down this wall, and to do that, we need to roll this grindstone down the hill. Honestly, the puzzles are a bit naff. Most of them are simply just moving objects from one place to another with little more thought given to it than that. Sadly, it doesn't get much better. But we reach Jared's lodge and after some fighting find one of his horns, which is never a good sign. Obviously we need to let her know, but to do that we need to get to the temple, and to do that we need to go through this stupid cave. Stupid because you have to path both characters through separately, which kind of feels like padding. You may want to get used to this. But we reach the city and see Queen Davina, the kind and just ruler, have a priest executed for threatening to reveal her secret. Neat. Gotta go to the temple though, and that leads us through the poor quarter, and this is some genuinely good environmental storytelling. As Hearn hasn't abdicated, the entire realm is struck by intermittent earthquakes, and even without the game outright telling you, it's obvious there's been a long time since they started. Even beyond that, it being abandoned and no attempt at being made to rebuild anything just highlights just how far south everything's gone. We reach the temple and find the doors locked, but if you collect these lodestones that are dotted around the world, Scree can transfer his essence into the statue and open it up. Do that, meet Hearn inside, doing his little ritual, where Scree throws him his son's horn, and as if by chance, Jen walks into the circle and, well, let's just watch the cutscene.
Have the gods answered my pleas, or do they mock me?
Scree, what just happened? What's he talking about?
Show me your arms, half-breed.
Half-breed, there he goes again.
Can you truly be Arella's champion?
Get your paws off me, Scree!
It is true. You don't yet hold the power, but I believe that you are Arella's chosen.
I haven't prepared her for this yet.
Then I suggest you do so quickly!
This is where Scree reveals to Jen that she is a half-demon and that she can channel the essence of the realms of oblivion, letting her take the forms of their inhabitants. But besides all that, can we talk about how smooth the animation for the transformation is? Love a good transformation sequence, and here's where the combat gets a bit better. The Ferri form is a lot stronger and faster than the human one, and has more varied attacks. Unlike other games with similar form mechanics, it also doesn't drain energy just by being in it, which is why you're probably only seeing human Jen in cutscenes going forward. The downside is that it doesn't regenerate energy, and if you run out in a fight you revert to human form. Luckily, defeated enemies drop energy, which Scree can store for Jen to draw from later to heal. There's also these large crystals that grant a lot of energy, bigger crystals that fully charge Scree's energy, and these gems that instantly full heal if you drop to 0. That aside, Ferri form lets you jump great heights as highlighted in the most "this might be important" cutscene later. Uses to jump the gate behind the temple and not the ledge from the cutscene. That's for later. Heading down the road, you end up at a hunting camp where this weird shaman dude tells you not to go any further because this is a sacred necropolis and it's forbidden to go there. Scree agrees, but Jen rightly points out that the best place to hide someone is in a place no one is allowed into, and it shows the current dynamic between them quite well. Scree is respectful and dogmatic, even to his detriment, whereas Jen is brash and blunt, but is also pretty good at connecting the dots because of it. Very buddy cop, honestly. When you do head to the necropolis though, surprise surprise, it's crawling with enemies, this time the Ferri, and it's where it adds a dimension to combat that I'm really not sold on. Unlike the Maokai that die when they are killed, these guys go into a stun state and begin to regenerate health, and after a certain amount of healing they get back up and start fighting again. Unless, of course, you hit them with a killing blow, with L2 and R2 together, unloading an absolutely vicious combo on your enemy who really probably didn't deserve it. The issue comes from the fact that you have to do this with every normal enemy in the game, so the over-the-top brutality just becomes the norm, and even worse is if you perform the move just a bit too fast, it doesn't actually count and you have to do it again. After clearing out the goons, you head back to the shaman and explain the situation, and he gives you his blessing for you to enter the necropolis proper, and it's probably one of my favourite cutscenes in Solum, partly because Jen and Scree are bouncing off each other near perfectly, but also because it manages to capture the character of this weird unnamed shaman in just a few short lines. Back again to the necropolis door, insert the gem, and you have to use Scree to possess the statue to open the door. Sadly, this is basically all Scree's possession does 90% of the time. Open doors. Also, the area will always have the correct amount of lodestones to activate the statue, so there's no actual danger there. Definitely feels like they could have done a lot more with it, but you can probably already see Primal's pretty short on gameplay. Clear out the necropolis interior and you find Jared in the back chained up. In saving him, he reveals that Davina was the one that abducted him, but that this Davina isn't the real Davina and is in fact a shapeshifter bent on destroying the realm. His real mother is also locked behind the next door over, however the key to get in is located in her fortress, which would be cause for more backtracking. However, we can finally use the rift gates to travel around. However, you need to mash X to get them running after choosing a destination. You could chalk this down to trying to add more gameplay, but at the same time I think it's to do more with loading in the background because you otherwise seamlessly appear in your next destination. It's a tiny thing, but I think it's neat. Back to the old quarter, and you have to reach a specific basement that wouldn't let you in unless you had the talisman that Jared gives you. Quick jaunt through the sewers and prison, once again moving both characters through the area for some reason. We come to the Colosseum, and after Jen shoots Scree down before he can info dump over a statue of Abdazur, Abaddon appears out of the smoke, calls Jen daughter, and has the demon from the start of the game, Belazor, rock up to nab her. As normal, grab the lowstones if you need to, and hop into the statue for a big boy battle. Kind of. Other than slightly elevated perspective, it handles exactly how Jen's combat does and somewhat highlights the potential the combat system has in a 1v1. The issue is that Belazor has awkward attack strings and ends up just being a blockfest. Additionally, after losing a quarter of his health, he starts leaping into the stands and shooting fireballs to force you to dodge, and he will do this constantly. But otherwise the fight isn't too hard, and after beating him he runs off, leaving Scree and Jen to lick their wounds and regain their bearings. The next progression thing is kind of stupid. You have to get back into the statue and use it to open the door. After a lot of running and fighting, with highlights such as fighting a bunch of dudes while archers shoot at you, we're introduced to summon stones, which you can use to bring Scree to Jen in an instant by interacting with it. This is after a handful of times it would have been useful, and is the only one in the entire realm, which is just great. We then get to a tower with no entrance but a massive gap in the wall further up that Scree can reach. He goes on ahead to try and find a way up, which leads to the first real puzzle of the game. The solution in hindsight is obvious, but you have to move 3 vases to the discoloured corner of the room so that you fall through into the storeroom and get the rope to help Jen up. The issue is that it's dark as balls in here unless you have the brightness turned up, and it's not super clear in the midst of things if what you're doing is actually right. But you get the rope, help Jen up to the tower, and systematically kill your way through the fortress, trying to avoid getting lost and failing all the same. You have to get to the throne room, but the only door to do so seemingly does not open. And here's where we get the least intuitive solution in the entire game. Do you want to know how you get past this door? You leave the room. This triggers a cutscene where another earthquake hits, breaking one of the pillars and smashing the door down. Yeah, this is definitely a solution. You bumble your way into the throne room for the key to Jared's chamber, only to get cornered by the fake queen and her cronies, which leads to a 6-on-1 fight. It's a bit rough, especially on your first playthrough, but luckily the game prompts you to save before plot-relevant fights. Afterwards, it's just a case of heading to Jared's chamber and following the path until you find the necropolis key. It's also around here I learned that most combat in the game is optional and you can just run past encounters. And it's not like you're even losing anything by not fighting them, because all you get out of beating them is energy, which you use to heal the damage you took from fighting. I imagine it's supposed to be some kind of self-sustaining loop, but seeing as there's no other incentive... Anyway, hop back to the necropolis and Jared will assist in clearing out enemies stopping you from opening the door, because some combat is still required. Here's where you discover his mother's dead body on the altar, and the boy is understandably distraught, but still utters one of the best lines in the entire game.
I'm sorry, Jared.
Don't be. My friends, I don't need your pity. I need your help.
And it's a testament to character building that they made you care about a character you've met twice. They agree that they need to unmask the imposter, and Jared surmises that they are using necromancy to maintain Davina's body and the illusion. They cremate the body and the shapeshifter appears, decidedly more melted or faced than before, who orders the Queen's Guard to kill all of you. The fight that follows isn't hard, it's a 5 relatively weak enemies, but with Jared it makes it much easier. Immediately afterwards, however, Hearn arrives, stopping the fight and ordering his men to hold the imposter still. He has his emotional reunion with Jared before completing the rite of succession by throwing himself and the imposter off the balcony. You win, but the game absolutely frames it as a Pyrrhic one. As Jen and Squee are heading back to the Nexus, they notice Bellazzar and an unknown figure leaving ahead of them, but Jen can't make out who. Very suspicious. Man, that was a lot to take in. But guys, that was the first level. Granted there are only 4 in the game, but oh boy, there was so much going on in Solum. Especially when you include learning basically every mechanic in the game. Jen's not happy about her current situation, understandably, but before she can really have it out with Squee, Arella pops out in all her butterfly-y goodness and explains in no uncertain terms that if Abaddon gets his way, Oblivion is screwed and hell on earth will be a mild way of describing what will happen to Mortalis. But rather than just explaining Abaddon as purely evil, which would be so easy for them to do, he is described as chaos. He is a force of change that stops all existence stagnating, and here is where the world building is genuinely quite clever. Because from this one cutscene, it's obvious that Arella is aware that Abaddon is required for the balance to be maintained, and that balance is part of the order of things. Abaddon? He doesn't care. Chaos thrives when their order is shattered, so it ends up with this weird state of you actually fighting for both sides trying to rein in Abaddon, while Abaddon's driving force is solely himself. The plot seems very basic on the surface, but dig a little below that, and there's actually quite a bit of nuance to it. Jen, somewhat begrudgingly, agrees to continue helping, and off we head to Aquis. We also learn that Squee is Abdazar, but that's not important right now. The first thing we learn about Aquis, outside of it being very pretty, is it's a water-filled realm. It's a water level. Please remain calm. We also learn that Jen can't swim, so Squee has to head off and find a solution to that in the structure in the middle of the lagoon. Thankfully, Squee's controls do not change underwater as, by his own admission, he just sinks to the bottom and walks with 0 slowdown. Additionally, he gets the ability to sink. Rather than slowly climbing down cliffs and walls, you just press the action button and plummet. speeds things up considerably. Making your way up the tower, Scree finds an Undyne locked in a cage, and after completely flubbing the first impression, we meet Queen Aino, who's locked in this thing as a sacrifice to the gods to cure a plague affecting her people, causing them to go insane. This course of action was decreed by King Adaro, the first one to fall to it. This is an intelligent species, by the way. Scree obviously calls BS and offers to find the cause of the plague. Aino then gives the Undyne essence to give to Jen to let her travel through the realm, but also tells Scree that she needs to be in the water when she transforms because the Undyne can't breathe out of it. Scree, remembering how much Jen hated the last transformation, tricks her into accepting the essence, completely forgetting the whole water thing. Jen complains, a lot, but there's no time to rest because it is where Aino's cell activates and raises her above the water and she's left to suffocate, and you need to save her. This is where you get your first interaction with the Undyne form and swimming, and it's actually not that bad. In fact, it's actually pretty damned good. Unlike a lot of games with swimming mechanics, SCE Cambridge were nice enough to heavily retool movement so that swimming doesn't feel like you're piloting a brick through the ocean. Very simply, the left stick now orients you and X makes you go forward. Tapping X twice rapidly makes you ludicrously fast because one of the big failings of water levels is how painfully slow you are. Also, as a fun little detail, the moment you stop moving, you immediately get oriented the right way, so you don't get confused because you're upside down and nothing makes sense. Nice little quality of life thing. Going back to the problem at hand though, there's actually no time limit on saving Aino, because the only failure state this game has is death, but you can't actually do anything else until she's saved, so you might as well beeline to the control room for the tower. Really feeding into the Atlantis was a super advanced civilization aesthetic with this one. Also, by stint of the levels being lakes, they are actually massive. Luckily, they were nice enough to add summoning stones everywhere so you didn't have to drag Scree with you. Get Scree to open the door, lower the cage and free Aino, where Jen basically tells her that Scree likes her and is just too shy to say it, which is entirely a throwaway thing and doesn't actually do anything to the narrative, but it's a fun little character moment regardless. After a brief swim, we quickly discover that there are in fact a non-magical cause for the plague. Filtration system that the Undyne have built to make their own realm inhabitable to them is offline, and whatever the hell is in the water is driving them berserk. Aino can go no further because she is likely to die, but you'll be fine because you're a half-breed. Or something. So you need to go and save them by turning on everything by yourself, and this is basically all the plot you get for the entire realm. All you're left with is the machines are off, go fix. This is where the game almost immediately drops you into combat, and that's typically where the underwater sections really come unstuck. Thankfully, they consider this, and combat is more or less the same as everywhere else in the game, only with the addition of a Y-axis. This also really highlights that combat is designed for one-on-one fights, because while you have the L1, it is entirely to facilitate the single target fighting. There's also something that makes it annoying, and that's that there is combos in this game for altering left and right attacks heavy and light. The game never explains these combos, and when you figure it out, the tempo of the combat is awkward, and because of the button sensitivity thing, you can fail a combo because you applied a little bit too much pressure. That said, you can skip most encounters in the game anyway, so no real loss. Anyway, we need to reactivate the system, but first we have to power up the priming station. Aquis, unlike Solum, is pretty puzzle-centric, but the puzzles are again very basic. For example, the priming station is climbing up and down ladders, going into pools and turning gears in the right direction to switch everything on. Conceptually, it's nothing worth mentioning, however it takes upwards of 6 minutes because every time you enter and leave a pool, you have to transform as to not suffocate, and this takes 5 seconds each time, so 40 seconds in total. That doesn't sound awful, but it's just kinda tedious, even though I still really love the animation. Afterwards, you have to switch on all the substations, which is basically just pressing a button, and the only real difficulty is that there are high currents that stop Jen from progressing, but all you need to do is for Scree to push a rock in the way. Things only really start happening when you enter the caverns and discover King Adaro, a massive twisted lobster monster brutalising the corpse of another Undyne. It's a good way to show how far he's fallen, but then you don't see him again for a long ass time. The only other thing you get is Arturo, an Undyne that's trapped in one of the substation turbines. He tells you the demon killed everyone and destroyed their equipment, and he hid inside the machine to save himself, but now he can't get out. He tells the pair to switch on the machine anyway so the Undyne can survive. Scree accepts this immediately, but is stopped by Jen, who calls him out on it, and says that in no uncertain terms that they are saving this guy. Scree threatens to turn the machine on anyway, before immediately caving. Basically from that point on, you use Scree to get to the next substation, which has a key to open the turbine maintenance hatch and let the guy out. But it's another good show of Scree as a character. He is laser focused on saving Oblivion. The little evils don't deter him in the slightest, which can also be seen when he tricks Jen into taking the Undyne essence. It also highlights that unlike a lot of mentor figure characters, he's not infallible and he makes stupid mistakes. And on that same note, Jen's naivete acts as a good balance as she sees the smaller picture, the minor players in the story and how it affects them, keeping Scree honest essentially. In a lot of other characters this would have been an annoying bleeding heart, but Jen is a New York waitress and comes from a low-income family, dragged into the battle for the fate of all existence. She is a very grounded, if somewhat selfish, viewpoint. From there, back to switching on stations. There are some points where you have to go above water to access areas, and the land is populated by these crab monsters that hit like trucks, but we've already discussed how combat is optional and is absolutely worth skipping in this case. But finally, after finding that last substation you missed because you're an idiot, you finally reach the purification tower and you face off with Adaro. It's nothing special really, you just have to fight him until he's in the finishing move state. However, you can't kill him because the poisoned water is keeping him alive somehow. So after you knock him down, you have to join Scree on the outer wall and open all the valves to purify the chamber. Repeat until all the valves are open and you can finally put him down for good. The fight isn't hard, but there is a level of annoyance that comes from him firing projectiles at you as you try to reach him, because of their hit detection is a bit off. Beating him gives you the activation key for the whole system, and here's where a bit of the world building falls apart. Well, it broke in the priming station, but here it just crumbles. The only way to activate the tower is at the very top of the tower, which is at multiple ladders above water, where the Undyne cannot go. You'd think they'd have something else to do it, but they only way to the top from the bottom and all the way through the underwater caverns. Ultimately, I think the developer just wanted a cool vista to end the level on, but still. Activating the tower, tells you that while those in the lagoon have died, there were some that escaped to safety and that the Undyne race will continue. God bless happy-ish endings, I guess. While I praise the world as the best water level I've ever played, this is honestly the weakest realm of the four, especially in the terms of plot. There's stuff at the start, stuff at the end, and a brief moment of stuff in the middle, but the vast majority is just swimming from point to point and not much else. But the duo returns to the Nexus after the job well done and is on to search for Lewis. Except no, as Arella tells Jen that she needs to return the balance to all the realms to truly stop Abaddon. Jen, understandably, goes off on them both. Firstly on Scree for his victory at all cost attitude towards blending Arturo, and then Arella for leaving the fate of creation in the hands of them, because that's all she has. Arella, true to her character, calmly explains she lost all her forces bar Abdazur in taking back Jen and the only other hybrid in existence, creatures that are not bound by the laws of the Nexus, and therefore the most dangerous beings alive, from Abaddon's clutches. Abdazur then hid them on Mortalis, and on his return was captured and tortured for years, never giving up a single crumb about where they were hidden, before escaping by projecting his soul into a gargoyle by sheer force of will and making them think he was dead. Scree is actually a badass, and he needs more respect put on his goddamn name. And I genuinely love how these little moments only happen in the Nexus. Lore-wise, it's because Arella can only appear in the Nexus, but also because it's a safe place for Jen where she can actually put her thoughts together. Even more than that, I like that even halfway through the game, Jen and Scree are still not fully buddy-buddy, and there are still some friction there and how they act and how they go about things. After this little spat, Jen agrees to continue helping, and off we head to Aetha, the home of the Wraith and the first realm of Chaos. It's cold, it's damp, it's miserable. The latter not partly down to the Wraith aristocracy subjugating the Helots, essentially the peasant class. Scree explains that while none of them are going to be friendly towards them, the Helots aren't likely to pose a threat, but the aristocrats are best avoided as much as possible. When you get control again, there isn't a lot going on for 25 to 30 minutes. It is ostensibly just walking through the early modern era town-shaped corridor looking for the plot, which I would say is one of the major weaknesses of this game. A lot of the open areas feel really empty, and it is just you beelining your way to the next story event. Sure, there are collectibles to find that unlock concept art and revival gems kicking about, but there is a distinct lack of gameplay in this game at times. Speaking of revival gems, I hope you have a lot, because this walk is absolutely going to claim them all. Because these stupid bat dog things hit insanely hard for what is supposed to be this world's jobber enemy. Additionally, there's always a group of them, they all have to be finished off, they do not stagger, and they give practically zero energy. That, and because they are very low to the ground, your attacks can miss them completely. Oh, and they also have an oddly persistent AI, so the old avoid combat strat is out of the window. Not kidding, I think these enemies are harder than most bosses. But we finally reach the village square and there's no one. Not a soul. Except for this guy that's tied to the executioner's block. This is where we're introduced to the villains of the piece. Ram and Impusa, a pair of grandstanding flying aristocrats with French accents. If you can't guess, we're doing the French Revolution today. All things need to, honestly. They inspect the dude and flip out about how he's a crap sacrifice and how they need a healthy, strong one, telling the crowd of no one that their captain will return to collect a good sacrifice later, before mercilessly killing the dude for the fun of it. Once again, the game does an amazing job of getting across who a character is from just one scene. Raum and Impusa are every bit the cruel, stuck-up, malicious nobles they're based on. And it's not just in their lines or delivery, it's how they animate around the room, how they imperiously float into the scene, and a little shout out for all the hand movements and facial expressions just sending it home. This game has been doing this the entire runtime, but this is the absolute best example. While we have the villains, we don't have the motive other than them being royal snobs, but maybe this random guy can tell us. Another bout of fighting these bat dogs, and we reach a seemingly empty wine cellar with someone hiding in it, and no other clues except for the slightly discoloured stone slab in the floor. I'm pretty sure there's no actual clues for this, but you're supposed to interact with all the wine casks until you find the correct one, that opens the floor and reveals villagers carrying inside a secret room. Now, I don't think the game ever gives you a hint to check the taps, and just kind of expects you to spam interact with everything in the room, which isn't a great plan, all things considered, but as soon as you open the floor, the wraith from before yells at you to close it, lest the people end up like the dude in the square. This guy is a right bastard to Jen, blaming her kind for what's happening here, but thankfully Scree isn't having any racism today. The man explains that the sacrifices are for their blood, which Ram uses to make him and his wife immortal. So we've now got French Revolution era aristocratic vampires, beating out Castlevania Nocturne by a good 20 years. The Helots weren't entirely screwed though, because they had a duke on their side plotting against the Count, who unfortunately got found out, hanged, and denied the burial rites of his people, and is now a ghost roaming the nearby graveyard. The duo offered to help him, but in the meantime, the Wraith plans to prepare the next offering. Himself, because he can no longer take asking his kinsman to step forward. And this is some nuanced stuff, because this guy, a wraith from the domain of chaos that is violently distrustful of outsiders, is willing to offer up his own life to protect his people from the nobility for as much time as they will give them. This guy has no name, by the way, and he's already gotten more characterization than everyone in Aquis. Anyway, you head into the graveyard and find the weird ghost tornado that is the Duke, who tells you that they will give you the wraith power if you complete their burial rites. Well, he doesn't out and out say it, but Jen figures out because she knows the drill by now. But to do that, you need to find his bones and get the sword off Valera, in that order because the game will not progress otherwise. Now, the bones are in this cage that is in the background of this entire cutscene, but how you get to it isn't really explained. Me, being an idiot, went running around the map for a good 20 minutes, which led me to the farm. An offshoot from the square, and other than half a dozen bat dogs, the only thing over here is a portal, and also just highlights how superfluous most of these things are. In Solum, you only use them to get to and from the necropolis. Aquis is only useful if you miss a substation, and I'll spoil it for you now. Aetha and the Last World do not use these portals at all. It definitely smacks of cut content where they clearly wanted to do more, but then development happened. Heading back to the graveyard again, we use the Ferri form to jump up this building, and then we cut down the cage in a very slapstick cutscene. where Scree loses an ear, and I'm just going to let this part run to highlight a point.
Oh dear.
I've been vandalized. It's not funny. It's an ear.
I know. Can't you still hear okay?
What?
Oh dear. I said can...
Yes, I heard you.
Sorry. I said sorry.
It's a whole ear.
It was an accident. I'll keep hold of this. We may be able to stick it back on.
I look ridiculous. There isn't much of me to begin with. A whole ear.
Now, PS2 era games aren't known for great voice acting, but this game really does buck the trend in my opinion. Genuinely, every character is acted perfectly, even the side ones that appear for like one scene. But special props goes to Hudson Laik and Andreas Katsoulis, the voices of Jen and Scree respectively, making them both feel fleshed out and real, because if they didn't, this game would be far less enjoyable. Drop the body in the grave and head back to the wine cellar and explain the plan to the chief. As he has no other choice, he agrees to use himself to lure out Valera, but first the duo needs him to bless some water, which requires backtracking and escorting the wraith to the well. Well, more him escorting us because he's seemingly immortal and we're made of paper, and the silly bat dogs are out in force to stop you. You reach the well, walk Scree down the wall to get the last drop of water, then a quick jaunt back to the square to fight Valera. This one is kinda rough. She hits like a truck and outranges those, so you really need to parry her to have a chance of winning, or enough revival gems to face tank, which I sure as hell didn't. This was my first death of the run, and it really leads to an extremely borderline unnecessarily morbid game over screen. Who hurt these guys? Better look at the next try though. Valera is dead, we get the sword, but the chief got taken away anyway, and we're all very broken up about it. But we need to complete the burial rites, which means skipping to the graveyard and a cutscene apparently. Not sure why it does this here, but not anywhere else, but it saves walking I suppose. Complete the rite, and Jen gets the wraith aspect and goes a bit ham, smashing someone's gravestone. And I didn't realise this before, but this is for Lara Croft, dated 2003. Reminder that Angel of Darkness came out 3 months after Primal, and based on how development went for that game, I imagine the developers for this game had some insider information for this funny little Easter egg. But after the longest wait of any of the realms, we finally have the Wraith form. Its fun little gimmick is Time Shift, allowing Jen to slow down time at the cost of her energy, which is needed to get through the door behind the graveyard into the dungeons. And up next we have another section where you have to direct both characters through the area to reach the other side. However, this is actually good because Jen has to do actions that help Scree get through and vice versa. So there's actual gameplay going on here. And speaking of gameplay, we have an honest to good puzzle going on. Scree moves the cages and Jen has to climb them to the exit. It's actually somewhat involved compared to everything else we've seen in this game. I just wish there was, more of it. And finally, the combat. Thankfully, Wraith is way more durable than the Ferri form, hits harder, and combat converts the time shift into a dedicated dodge button. So fights in the realm are going to look like this from now on. And thankfully, the bat dogs are no longer an issue. Also, the finishes are just so sadistic, dear lord. Another time shift door and we reach what I like to call the Monty Python room because it's just these disembodied heads ripping into each other, only to be interrupted by one of them calling for the guards. A quickish fight later and we're back to the Monty Python absurdity. Tone's wild right now, but we do learn that the Count has a machine for converting Helot blood into an elixir somewhere in the chateau. We just need to find it. But for that, we need to escape the dungeons. A little down the way we find this nameless wraith that fights by your side. Not sure how he's free and I'm not going to knock the help. Otherwise, not much going on until we leave the dungeon. There's a new screen possession mechanic where you have to tap X at the right time to rock a statue back and forth. Just another example of a missed opportunity. After many battles, you reach the exit and your wraith friend simply just leaves. No idea who you are, but Godspeed, shirtless man. But seeing as the only exit leads to the chateau, I think he just dies off screen. Speaking of the chateau, the moment you enter, Jen gets captured by Rom and taken to his private laboratory, making this next bit a Scree only section, so thankfully no combat. Not much of anything else either really, aside from a couple of puzzle adjacent things that are just interacting with a simple object in the library to open a secret door. But at least we get to the hype head.
Oh my god! Go, Scree, go!
Not sure how he knows about Scree, but I love him all the same. As we reach the ballroom, we get a cutscene of a young Wraith girl dancing alone before Ampusa catches her and verbally rips her to pieces. And the way she reacts when her own daughter wishes she was dead clearly displays how twisted the Wraith are, or at least the aristocracy. They are so casually callous and cruel that anger, resentment and hatred are viewed as desirable traits. This is the best showcase of something the game has been doing quite well from the start. It manages to explain, or at worst, bullet point how the races of the different realms function as a society, without out-and-out expedition dumping it all on you. From there though, progression gets a bit weird. It's not super clear where you're supposed to go, so if you get super lost, don't worry, because you get to enjoy the chateau for much longer than intended. And it's very pretty. All the levels are. The settings are all striking and set the tone of the current adventure, for the lack of a better term, exquisitely. And for Aetha, it goes from oppressively miserable to oppressively opulent, really hammering home the split between the haves and have-nots. What the game actually wants you to do is climb this corner, jump into the tower, and go to the top room where Jen is being held in an Iron Maiden. Scree frees her and we get a pretty touching moment where he shows genuine concern for her well-being, considering she was just captured by vampire Marquis de Sade. He's also taken the vambraces and locked them in a jar. We could smash the glass door, but instead we need a key, and this is where I rip into the map in the pause menu a bit. See, it's not an issue in most cases because the worlds are a bit linear, but the objective marker system is terrible. It only appears when you're on the correct map screen, and since the map for the chateau is split into 6 pieces, it can become extremely confusing and figuring out your destination is awkward as balls. But in this case, we go through the dining hall into Ramen and Pusa's bedchambers, but the key isn't there, so the Count must have it on him at the ball. And Scree comes up with a brilliant plan to steal the key from him while he's there. But that really doesn't do it justice, so let's run the cutscene once more.
If only we could find a way to get one of us close to him. Distract him a little. Steal the key. You know, the kind of distraction and close contact one would find with, say, dancing? Just to pluck an example from thin air?
You can stop plucking. I'm not doing it.
Doing what?
Putting that dress on, disguising myself as a wraith, dancing with the Count, and stealing the key.
Now there's a plan.
I said no!
More playful scenes to sell the characters' relationship, love to see it. Waddle to the ballroom, cutscene with Ram being a little bit too forward, and we get the key, waddle back to change, and then the game teleports you to the tower to get the vambraces. And then, we're back to blindly wandering the halls to find progression, only this time with combat. The door in the library is where you need to go, but it's locked, and you don't really have a hint as to where the key is, so you have to bumble around the place until you stumble across the entrance of the ballroom where one of the guards has it. Return to the library, open the door, and head to Elizabeth's room. And this cutscene to me is the epitome of how the wraiths function. She walks around with a dead rat who is her only friend in the loosest possible terms. She professes to hate the things she enjoys and only gives you the key to the dark maze, which we learn from the heads around the place that is where the machine is, after a dance with Scree and after you promise to kill her father. Because wraiths are just really goddamn awful apparently. And it's back to fumbling around blind in the only known use of the teleporter in the entire realm, because I lost my patience in running about the place. God, there's just so much fighting in this area, but we finally make it to the maze and it's a pretty good puzzle. Scree possesses the figurehead over the gate and can be used to help navigate Jen through the levers in the maze that open the way to the blood machine. My only complaint is that Scree's perspective is too shallow and you can't see the paths further in properly, but it's a nice change of pace regardless. Into the door and we're immediately greeted with more dungeons. I don't know if it was intentional, but there's some really powerful theming here, with grand opulence sat right on top of excessive cruelty. The dungeon is filled with more guards and more fighting. Lucky for us, they spice things up with guns, but close the distance and they're made of paper. And down here we find the machine and our wraith friend from the village. We free him and he explains that destroying the machine will do nothing, but tainting the elixir will deny them their immortality. And how do we do this? Putting Jen in the machine and using her blood. Or as the Wraith Man puts it...
So what do you suggest?
I suggest you, corruption. I suggest you. Hybrid blood will contain the mortal taint. That, mixed with the wraith element already drawn here, would prove highly dangerous to them. You must enter the machine.
Jen doesn't think it's a good idea, but Scree asks her to trust him, so she gets in the machine. Long story short, the Wraithman tries to drain Jen dry in a shocking twist no one saw coming, only stopped by Scree bashing him over the head with a metal bar. It's lovely that this guy really encapsulates the Wraith as a whole. Loyal to those that they are very close to, will throw everyone else under the bus at the merest provocation. But the drafts get taken to the Count and Countess, and we need to head back over there to take them out, which means waltzing down to the ballroom for a throwdown. Thankfully, if you got lost on the way there are no enemies in your way, so it becomes super easy to get there. Score 1 for having a complete lack of direction. We catch the happy couple in the middle of their nightcap, and after a bit of banter into the fight. First faces Mpusa whip on whip, with Rom occasionally shooting lightning at you. Not difficult, but Mpusa will periodically run away, so you have to chase her down. Take her out, and we have a cutscene that starts with Rom extremely confused and saddened by her death. But as Jen says, it's not clear if this is as a husband or as a scientist. This starts phase 2 in the fight with Rom. Again, it's not that hard, but it does get really tedious because he just keeps flying into the air and becoming untouchable. Also, his ground attacks have weird animations and stuff, but the Wraith Whip has a lot of range, and that kinda makes up for it. After beating him, he slightly dies on the floor long enough to mourn his lack of suffering. As he dies though, the camera pans to Elizabeth, who's been watching for the fight from the balcony, before word to see turning away, and that's where the level ends, and Jen and Scree head back to the Nexus. Honestly, after a lot of thought, this is my favourite ending of any of the realms just because of how dour it is. You've stopped the Helots from being wholesale slaughtered to keep a madman and his wife in power, but they are still oppressed by the aristocracy. Roman and Pusa were monsters and needed to be stopped, but Elizabeth lost her parents, and Wraith or not, that's still tragic. You're not so much as saving the day as you've just reset the status quo. It wasn't a heroic act, but it was a necessary one. And when we head back to the Nexus, there's no reprieve. Aurelia's gone, Abaddon has taken over, and everything's all corrupted looking. Jen and Scree get separated due to a magic wind thing, and Jen ends up going to the main chamber alone, where she finds Lewis, ripping out Cronus' heart. He's been possessed by Abaddon, who's been using him to unbalance all of the realms. And finally face to face with him again, Jen calls Abaddon on what he truly is. A greedy, self-serving monster that only cares about destroying all of creation. And Abaddon, clearly having the upper hand in this ancient power struggle, wastes no time in gloating, mocking our girl, mocking Aurela, before once again leaving in a cloud of flies. Just some lovely imagery, really. Scree finally catches up to find Jen in a state of panic, distraught, thinking that it's all over and that there's nothing they can do. But then Scree hits her with probably one of my favourite motivational pep talks ever.
Right. The best thing to do when things get as bad as this is to look at the facts. Agreed? Good. Fact number 1, and top fact on the list. I am still alive. Agreed? Good. Fact number 2, you're still here to take care of me. Thank goodness for facts.
It's succinct, to the point, and massively explains that if Scree is still here, Aurela is not completely gone, meaning the duo have a chance, but first they need to enter the second realm of chaos and the final level of the game, Volca. Unlike the rest of the realms, Scree doesn't immediately give the lowdown, and on Jen's questioning, he explains this is because no servant of order would willingly come to this place, and the last time he was here, he was being tortured. After Jen's awkward attempt to lighten the mood, he goes on to further explain that Abaddon wouldn't have had to do anything to cement his power here, and that the Jinn's rulers are godlike beings, and that they'll need that power with Cronus gone. Also, their power is tied to the volcano, and they are at their strongest while it is active. This might come up in the test later. But to get to them, we need to climb into the volcano itself, and it's good for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's another example of using both characters to progress instead of progressing both characters separately. And secondly, climbing down a volcano cavern is just so foreboding. Partly because of the scale of the whole thing, but also because it genuinely feels like you shouldn't be here. The imagery and the scale just make you feel like you're climbing into hell or something. I've already praised this game for the theming of each realm, but this is most definitely the best one they've done. As you reach the bottom, there is a door that can only be opened by lighting the oil braziers with a torch. But it's still dark in here, and Jen decides in her infinite wisdom to light another, which sets off the entire room, awakening the djinn residing within. Thinking fast in an attempt to avoid immediately being disintegrated, Scree spins a lie that he is a servant of Abaddon trying to smooth talk their way out of the situation by praising King Iblis, the ruler of the djinn. The guy in front of them, however, says that Iblis doesn't care for Abaddon or his servants from the Nexus, but suggests that someone that might want to dethrone the king might find some friends in the court willing to help them. In that, I'm not saying I would, but if I was going to, tone of voice. Before, of course, asking to buy Jen to be his hybrid for reasons. Scree deflects by repeatedly calling Jen an idiot until the djinn gives up, but not before granting the djinn aspect to Jen so that they can survive in the volcano, making the second fastest we've received a form outside of the Undyne. But I do want to point out something I really don't like about this cutscene, and it's just how dumb Jen's acting. She's always been a bit slow on the uptake, but Scree has just gotten done explaining how this place and its people were the most dangerous thing they've ever faced before she yells into a sealed temple that she's been told has godlike beings inside. I love that she's irreverent, a very human character, but this feels uncharacteristically daft. Anyway, progression is the same as it ever was for the most part, walking through halls, fighting enemies, which is where we get to play with the djinn form. See, it has zero usefulness outside of combat, but is the strongest combat form in the game, because you can use circle to change from two smaller weapons to one massive greatsword that hits like an absolute truck. So much so that it's actually the most satisfying the combat has ever been, which is a bit sad considering this is the last level, but god damn does it feel good to launch people across a room. The next anything of note is the lava statue room, where the objective is to simply get Scree to 2 statues to create a bridge to the exit with this bird in the middle. One side is actually a fun little puzzle where you once again have to use both characters to get to these wheels to open and close the gates in the water, whilst also having the other character in the right place to progress. An actually good puzzle again, but the other side is a little hard to understand. On the surface it's just a doorway with a lava fall in it. I'm not too proud to admit that this stumped me for a good 20 minutes. What you're actually supposed to do is go Wraith form, then time shift as the lava fall dissipates for a moment and walk through. The thing is, the gap is not at all visible when you're not time shifting, so it feels a bit like you need to know the solution ahead of time. Either way, we turn off the flow, Scree possesses the statue, and moves the wing, and we progress further into the mountain. Not much longer, we hit another gauntlet of enemies, but other than being pretty long, it isn't all that hard. But upon beating the final one, the djinn from before calls for a halt to the fighting before ordering Jen to throw the last remaining lava golem thing into the pit, which she obviously does. See, this djinn was actually King Iblis, and is using the aspect he gave her to control Jen. He then orders her to kick Scree down the hole, starting our mandated Scree-only section. It's honestly not that bad, and actually much better than Aetha, because while there are some basic puzzles, they feel more involved than did whatever the chateau offered. But the real beauty of this section is climbing around the caverns, because it makes you feel so extremely insignificantly small, which is fitting considering Scree needs to take on the djinn alone, for now at least. After more climbing, we reach the chamber of Malakel, who is also not happy about being woken up. Scree tries the Abaddon minion thing again and tells her Iblis suspects her of plotting against him, and she calls him on his lies. Not the plotting thing, because she is, but him being Abaddon's minion, rightly asserting that he is a servant of Arella and demands to know why he's here. He explains what happened, that Kronos is dead and that they're looking for a way to revive him. Malakel, after getting over the shock, flies into a rage about how Iblis's vanity and arrogance is going to doom their realm. Scree says that she must help free Jen if they are to stand a chance of saving everyone, and after some pride of her own, she offers untainted djinn essence to give to Jen to do just that. And off Scree goes, literally just down the road because Jen is like a minute away. She's fighting the golem things again and is openly hostile to Scree when he turns up, swinging at him as he tries to get through to her brainwashed mind. She then resorts to calling Scree short, which is funny because even when she's evil, that's the best she can muster. But it manages to get under Scree's skin enough for him to stop playing around and fight her for real. Also, this might be a quirk of the PS4 emulation, but her energy blades aren't visible in this cutscene, so it just looks like she's awkwardly posing. The fight also isn't that hard, it's just a case of spacing Jen and hitting her while she's out of range, and even if you trade, you tend to deal more damage anyway. Afterwards, Scree gives her Malakel's energy, and Jen returns to her senses. She asks what she did before she slowly starts to remember. Scree naturally plays it all down, but when Jen gets to calling him small, he starts making vaguely subtle dick jokes, which is very in character for her. Scree gets her to test the Jinn aspect again, to test to see if it's actually pure, and she pretends to be possessed for a joke. It doesn't go over too well, but the two are back together at least. The trip back to Malakel's chamber takes a bit longer because we're back to fighting, but it's fun now, so we don't mind it. Jen and Scree both don't trust the Queen, but they are under no illusion that they can do this without her. Malakel, much like everyone else in the realms of chaos, treats Jen like an it, so getting bored of that, she introduces herself as Jen, before we get to the planning. See, Iblis was granted a heart stone by Abaddon, the same type Kronos had, that made him immortal and able to die of natural causes or by the hands of demon or mortals. He is, in a wonderful bit of oversight, able to be killed by a hybrid. She then planned to have Jen kill Iblis, take the heart stone, and use it to revive Kronos. However, Iblis has returned to his Hall of Gods to hide from the only threat to him in the realm, and we need to break in. What generally sells this cutscene to me is how casually Malakel suggests killing her husband. Granted she's doing it so she could rule the place, but unlike the Wraith of Aetha who relish it, she treats it like the same energy as someone would be making a sandwich. Like performing a coup is a footnote on her to-do list. But then, why would a god bother themselves with something so minor? Getting into the Hall of Gods is probably the most involved progression in the game. Firstly, you need to open this door, which requires all 4 of these pots to be filled with lava, which means going to 4 separate rooms and 4 puzzles, each with differing difficulties from somewhat decent to press the button stupid. They're nothing all that special, but I've got to give props to this room purely for the propping open the door trick that I wish we had more of, but that's me with gameplay in general at this point. Though I would like to point out an issue with these different forms, and that's that outside of the realms you get them in, they just stop being useful outside of very specific cases. Ferai ends up just a jump bot, Undyne for the court of mandated water sections, and Wraith for walking through doorways. Granted, the first half of Aetha you need to use the Ferai form to fight, but that's an outlier, and otherwise they're just very underutilised. Entering the Hall of Gods, and naturally your eyes are drawn to this absolutely massive statue in the middle, being held up by ropes. Naturally, you need to get Screed to each, burning the ropes at the anchor points, then rock it back and forth until it creates a bridge to the inner sanctum. It's not super involved, but it's pretty solid all the same. We're almost to King Iblis, but it wouldn't be a walk to the boss without an enemy gauntlet. But it's not that bad, and you're quickly into the cutscene with Iblis standing on a statue and Foe congratulating you for your audacity. Jen tells him that she's here to kill him, and he explains how he could end this immediately, but instead decides to use his big dumb statue to fight you. If you've guessed this would be a giant boss fight, you would be about 2/3 right, because it is a boss and it is giant, but a fight definitely is not. All you have to do is push all the sconces off their pedestals, get the statue to smash the giant ones, and kick the lamps that Scree pushes down off the ledge. That's it. A character that has been touted as having godlike powers, and the fight boils down to this. Anyway, destroying all the lights for some reason makes the statue shut down, and Iblis jumps to safety, but ends up barely clinging to the ledge. Jen takes the heart from him, and Malakel turns up. Iblis implores her to help him, and Jen asks why they need to kill him at all, seeing as they've got what they came for. Malakel, touched by this compassion, throws Iblis off the ledge anyway because killing her husband was always the plan. She then demands the heart, stating that its power is the only way to leave the hall, that they will leave the power to revive Kronos. Malakel then breaks off a shard of the heart and gives it to the duo, taking the rest for herself and vowing to use her newfound immortality to keep the rest of the Jinn in check, or, in her words, some kind of order. We go through the door and it's a straight shot to the exit. However, there is a massive drop to the rift gate out of there, and there's no way back. This is where Scree starts climbing up, saying he needs to do something if they're going to escape. And this is where I'll let the rest of the cutscene play out.
Scree.
I must, Jen. This may be the last you see of me.
Scree, if it's that dangerous, don't go. What are you doing? Scree! 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 Scree!
Well, here goes.
Guess who needs bailing out again? Oh my god, Scree! Scree! What did you have to smile about, great lunk. I won't leave you lopsided, Rocky boy. I know. You'd hate me wasting time blubbering here. We're on a mission, right? Goodbye, Scree.
I suppose he meant a great deal to you.
More than you could possibly know. So now you want to kill me too, huh? Well, that's just fine, Spiky, 'cause I'm ready to...
That's no way to greet an old friend. One minute you're crying like a baby because you think I've had a fall. Next...
Scree!
Of course it's me. And I would prefer Abdazur if you're capable of such a momentous adjustment.
Okay, don't push it. Because those tears weren't just for you. I mean, it has been an emotional couple of days. You remember that. Ha! General Abdazur. Wow.
Hold on tight to the Jinn heart. It's a long way down, Jed.
And this is honestly the capstone of Jen and Scree/Abdazur's relationship. They absolutely care for each other's well-being, but they are on no means above giving each other the business, or in this case, making it seem like they threw themselves off a building. Yeah, I'm going to call that one...
distinctive inappropriate.
And with Volca done, I really need to mention how out of whack the realm balancing is. Not in terms of difficulty, but narratively. See, Solum and Aetha get the lion's share of the screen time, and the game does an awful lot to explain and build on the realm's people and lore. Aquis and Volca just don't? You get the Undine are tech savvy and the Jinn are allegedly all-powerful, but outside of that we get nothing, with a much shorter runtime for each level comparatively. A little more screen time, a bit more lore, and they really might have stood out. Alas, it wasn't meant to be. But as we return to the Nexus to put the shard in Kronos' chest, who should turn up but Belazor to block your path? Abdazur tackles him and they both go tumbling into the lower levels, and as Jen goes to revive Kronos, Abaddon then blocks her way, distracting her long enough that Lewis, or what's left of him, sneaks up behind her and takes the shard, leading us to the final battle. It's kinda disappointing, to be honest. First phase is fighting Lewis/Abaddon in your Ferrite, Undone and Wraith forms, and each time you knock down a quarter of his comically large health bar, it swaps to the next form. And the only unique thing is that the teleports in the Undone stage are to do the stupid ink bubble shot with the terrible hitbox. Otherwise, it's business as usual. Same goes for the Belazor fight, really. It's almost blow for blow a repeat of the Solum fight, but with the added bonus of him occasionally jumping into the Nexus to shoot beams at you. To counter and also progress the fight, you have to use the mirror shield to reflect it back by standing in these spotlights. Repeat 4 times to defeat Belazor and enter the final phase. It is, as you can guess, the Jinn form for the last leg against Lewis. Again, not all that exciting, even though he has these fire attacks that I think are supposed to do damage, but the hitbox is so awkward and weird, you can accidentally avoid them very easily. But you beat him and Lewis returns to normal, only to die cradled in Jen's arms after sharing a moment of vulnerability about how scared he was the night of the attack. Abdazur runs in and tells Jen that they need to use the shard on Kronos now. Of course she gets there, but Abaddon is blocking your path now. However, he is made of smoke, so Jen just runs through him and stabs the shard into Kronos, and the lad is back alive again. Woohoo! Cue Abdazur carrying Lewis's body into the Nexus chamber, telling Jen he's gone, but suggesting that no one knows where the well of the Nexus goes. Then Arella floats on him, explaining that many believe that it leads back to life, whatever the hell that means. With Jen's blessing, Abdazur really unceremoniously throws Lewis's body soul thing into the well. They all congratulate and praise Jen for saving all of creation, that she needs to return to Mortalis because staying any longer might kill her for real. And it's a real touching goodbye scene, even the bit where Jen straight up just goes, "Nah, you're Rocky for life now," to Abdazur. And that's where the game ends. But not before we have a sweet post-credit scene with Jen reading to Lewis in a hospital bed. And then it immediately ruins this moment by cutting to an ad for the next game, because this is the PS2 era and they just did that all the time. All told, this game is very much a middle-of-the-road affair. The combat is clunky and awkward, the exploration is half-baked for the most part, and while there are some good puzzles in the game in the back half, the rest are just one-button affairs or just a bit too obtuse to get without spam-clicking the world. But even with that said, I would still strongly recommend this game purely because of the high-quality world-building and how well characterised most of the cast are. And as I've been beating you with this entire video, The relationship between Jen and Scree, how it starts, how it grows and how it ends are arguably some of the best I've ever seen in a video game. And this is on the PS2, a console that's not known for good characterization outside of RPGs and whatever first party developers / Rockstar were cooking up at the time. Play Primal, guys, you probably won't regret it. I hope you enjoyed the video about one of my favourite relatively obscure titles of all time. Please leave a like if you enjoyed and be sure to comment to let me know if you've played the game and how you feel about it. I have been the Resident Gremlin, and I'll see you next time.